Erik, Chapter 24. My preparations for Christine's arrival were interrupted by one unfortunate incident. Meg knocked on the door of my office one day. I had long ago moved out of the rudimentary caravan and now had a permanent building to house the administration of my carnival, casino, and racetrack enterprises. I opened the door to see her standing there, wringing her hands together. I had no idea why she was so agitated and invited her in to sit on the sofa. I sat down next to her. She sat there, silently trembling and unresponsive to my questions. I did not know what I should do for her. I realized that she was highly emotional and resolved to leave her be until she was ready to speak. I told her I would do this and rose to go back to my desk, but she clutched at my arm to prevent me. I sat back down, sighing inwardly, but unwilling to leave a woman who was in such obvious distress. My mind began to wander as I patted her hand absently, wondering how soon I could politely dispense with this interruption and resume my work. I was less shocked and angered than I was merely irritated when I felt her hand take the mask from my face. I knew that Meg had seen me unmasked before and that she would not be adversely affected by the sight. And I did not have the sudden stabbing panic I had had when Christine took the mask from my face long ago, for I knew Meg's love for me would not waver when she saw what it hid. I was well pleased with the results of the surgery I had had. As promised, the twistedness of my cheek had been smoothed somewhat flatter. The white scars where ridges of my flesh had been removed were concealable under the makeup I applied. The same went for the white scars around my lips where the ugly, puffy flesh had been removed. I had gotten rather lucky, I felt, in that the numbness was only in those areas, not in the areas I needed to use to eat and to speak. I still had the droopy eyelid, some divots in my cheek, half a nose, and the gap in my skull under my forehead. But I considered the fact that I had been able to have a less restrictive mask designed for me to be a victory. I continued to wear the hairpiece of black hair, in vain defiance of the frail gray strands that grew haphazardly beneath it. Meg leaned forward to put my mask gently onto the coffee table in front of the sofa. Then she turned back to me, took my head into her hands, and planted her lips over mine. I froze in shock as she pressed forward with her kiss, making me lean backward until I was half reclining over the arm of the sofa. I finally removed her hands and her lips from my person and held her away from me with my hands on her shoulders. I could not help sending a guilty glance up at the wall of my office where Christine's portrait hung beside the photograph I had had taken of Sarah and I on our wedding day. Neither of those lovely faces seemed to condemn me for my part in whatever this current debacle was, so I switched my attention back to Meg. Meg, I began, I know that you have been a very good friend to me for the past 10 years. You and your mother have saved me countless times, and you have been my support as I made my climb to where I am now. But I cannot allow whatever this is, I gestured at the two of us, to continue. I wish that my heart was pulled to you, Meg, I truly do. You are a fine young woman, and the fact that this doesn't bother you, I gestured to my face this time, is a great comfort to me. But you deserve a man who loves you with all his heart and soul. I glanced back at the wedding picture on the wall. I didn't know whether everyone was destined to find what Sarah and I had had together, but I would not allow Meg to trap herself in a loveless marriage when her soulmate might still be out there, somewhere. Meg sat back on the sofa, a petulant scowl on her face. I had not thought her so willful, nor so set on her goal of getting me as her lover. But the expression on her face betrayed the ugliness of her inner thoughts at that moment. She made no comment in response to my speech of rejection, But as she walked out past the portraits on the wall, she dragged her hand along the bottom of the frames, tilting them so they hung crooked from their nails. I sighed as she flounced out and slammed the door. Then I rose, straightened the pictures on the wall, and went back to my desk to continue working. I suddenly realized that I needed something from Darius's desk in the outer office, and opened the door Meg had slammed to go find it. I was startled to see Meg immediately outside my door still, weeping in her mother's embrace. Antoinette looked at me over Meg's head with a look that I couldn't quite interpret. It was as if she did not thank me for protecting her daughter's honor and future happiness. I opened my mouth to say something, then realized I had no idea what to say. I shook my head, closed my mouth, and walked away. I felt all 4 of their hostile eyes on my back as I went. Sadly, from that day on, I lost the sense that I could count the jurywomen as family. They seemed more likely to pick fault with everything I did, and I lost my temper at them once or twice when they drove me beyond my endurance. They, in turn, seemed to remember all the violent misdeeds that had been attributed to me, deservedly or no, during our acquaintance. Antoinette retreated into extreme formality around me, and stopped performing all the little kindnesses that had made me feel mothered when she was around. Meg still retained her fascination with me, but it seemed even more intense. I did not bother changing my will after their attitude shifted so dramatically. I had no one else to leave my fortune to, and I could not deny that they had put nearly as much hard work into my empire as I had. On the 14th of September, 1905, at 6:45 p.m. by my pocket watch, I shouldered my way through the door that led from the stairwell onto the rooftop of the modest little warehouse building that overlooked the docks. I had purchased this building from its owner 3 weeks previously, in anticipation of this exact moment. As I neared the edge of the roof, the vast bulk of the newly built Empress of Britain loomed up from where it sat docked at the waterside. The scent of the sea air, with its visceral reminder of the motion of the waves, made me feel slightly nauseous, but I breathed carefully until it passed. I had something I needed to accomplish here. I ducked down behind the rooftop parapet to make sure that no eyes were looking up at my perch. Seeing that the coast was clear, I adjusted my hat downward to better hide the mask in its shadow, then cautiously peeped toward the ground. The dock was a hive of confused activity. I watched it for a while before I began to see some patterns in the flow of humanity. Every 10 minutes or so, a well-dressed individual or couple would stroll down the main gangway that had been secured between the ship and the dock. Journalists would crowd around them, asking the inane questions that always seemed to be asked of the rich and famous. Eventually, the journalists would run out of questions, and as if they had been waiting in the wings for their cue, the next well-known entities would make their way down the gangway. 4 secondary gangways were thick with streams of baggage handlers and various and sundry uninteresting, presumably poor people. A brass band on the dock played marches of the currently popular genre that J.P. Sousa had made so famous. The journalists finished up with one illustrious victim, and all eyes that weren't currently busy, including my own, darted to the dark opening in the side of the ship where we could expect the next famous face to emerge from. I knew that very soon, that next face would be the one I had come to see. Christine had confirmed that she was on the ship by telegram before leaving London. A man and a boy appeared, and I relaxed for a moment before something about the man caught my eye. Under the wrinkles, the unsightly pudge, and the gray and blonde hair, I suddenly caught a glimpse of a man I had hated for more than 10 years. He had his hand on the shoulder of an unremarkable youth of about 10 years old. I looked closer, then pulled out my opera glasses and had a look through those, following the two as they descended the gangway. It was indeed Le Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. I had no idea who the child was, but assumed it must be his son. That must mean... I swung my lenses back to the doorway of the ship. Standing perfectly framed in the opening was a woman, dressed in a red velvet coat with white fur trim. A matching hat crowned the updo of chestnut curls she wore atop her head. She looked around her with a reserved little smile, nodding to her left and her right, then began her trip down the gangway. It was Christine. I watched her descend until she was mobbed by the press at the bottom. Raoul tried as best he could to protect her and his son from the onslaught, but could barely keep them back. I kept my lenses focused on her, drinking in the details of her unchanged form. She was still astoundingly, heart-achingly lovely, and I felt my chest seem to tighten as I took in her new appearance. I sighed, and her name escaped my lips. Christine. Before I could shake myself and laugh at my own romantic foolishness, I noticed through the lenses that my saying her name seemed, impossibly, to have attracted her attention. I didn't think I had thrown my voice to her ear as I had in the past. I was fairly certain it was impossible over such a distance. But her gaze now seemed riveted on me where I stood on the rooftop. I panicked and dropped flat to my belly behind the parapet. Then I crawled on my elbows back to the staircase door, heedless of the damage to my fine suit. I was not ready for Christine to know that I was here in America. I hoped that I had not given myself away. As I made my way back to my carriage, I began to worry again about whether I had chosen the right approach. I had spent much of the last month tied up in knots over what would be the best way to reveal myself to Christine, to let her know that I wanted to be part of her life again without causing undue shock to her system. I had decided to once more let my music do my communicating for me, but had agonized over the best, subtlest, yet most definitive way to do this. Ideally, I wanted my music to lull her into a pleasurable reverie of thinking about our time together, at which point I would present myself to her. We would then express to each other our pleasure in seeing one another again. But how was I to get my music to her ear? That was what had been tormenting me. The problem was that she had not heard it in 10 years, and might not recognize it. I planned to use the musical themes I had written into Don Juan Triumphant to tug at her memory. I had toyed with the idea of having the marching band at the dock play it, or perhaps the ship's orchestra on the journey over. But the music had proven unpopular with common people ever since its debut. I didn't think I could have stood to hear it disparaged again as it had been before. No, the music needed to be played for Christine alone. I actually invented a brand new idea in the course of my struggle. I thought I might train a singer to sing some of my music and send him to Christine's hotel to sing it for her. As far as I knew, no one had ever employed singers to send this kind of singing telegram before. But upon reflection, I abandoned this idea too, although I stored it away in the back of my mind, sensing future profitability in it. For this situation, it was too personal. Christine might waylay my singer and plumb him for details as to who had sent him and where he had learned the music. I thought I might have stood outside her stateroom on the ship and played my violin for her. But the disappointing lack of secret passages on board a ship made it so I would have had to stand in the main hallway, exposed to all who passed by, and even to Christine herself if she should open the door. When I heard that she would be traveling with Raoul, I gave this idea up too, with a sense of relief. I hadn't been overly eager to subject myself to the motion of the waves again, even though modern ships were supposed to be smoother to travel on. The carriage pulled up to the Hotel Astor, and I got out. I walked into the lobby, flashing my room key at the concierge. He raised an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance, but made no comment. I nodded to the elevator operator as I got in, and he took me up to the top floor where there were only 2 grand suites. I thanked him and got out. I chose the door to the left. I had also rented the suite on the right for Christine. I had selected this hotel for her to stay in for 2 reasons. First, its architecture appealed to me. It reminded me of Paris somehow. I hoped it would bring a taste of home for Christine, too. The second reason was the childlike ease with which I could access her balcony from the other penthouse suite. Heights did not bother me at all, and I found I could hop from my balcony onto hers without a second thought. The presence of the younger de Chagny boy, for I still contemptuously considered Raoul to be a boy, even though he was Christine's own age, had solidified for me which approach I was going to take to reintroduce my music. I unwrapped the music box I had constructed, hopped across the balcony, and entered the other suite. I placed the music box on the piano bench, then retreated hastily to my own rooms. The box would masquerade as a gift for the child, while it delivered its musical message to his mother. I cleaned myself up, changing into a different suit from the valise I had brought. Then I moved to where I had determined was the best place to eavesdrop on the people in the next room. I pressed my ear to the wall, and was treated to a full performance of what I facetiously nicknamed marital spat in A minor, as the de Chagny family entered. Raoul was in a fury. What a dreadful town. We have never been mobbed like that when we arrived anywhere. I felt like a zoo animal in a cage for everyone to gawk at. I tightened my lips and sniffed in ironic amusement as I heard him. He really had no idea. I heard the first tinkling melody of my music box through the wall. It seemed the boy had found it. Then I heard Christine speak to Raoul.
Darling, it'll be all right. It's just how Americans are, I've heard. I wasn't hurt or offended. Let's just focus on this performance. It's only 2 weeks until our ship leaves again. Then we'll be back in our home, before the fireplace, just you and I. Won't that be nice?
To my cynical ears, she sounded as if she were bribing a 3-year-old to behave with the promise of a treat in the future. I heard the clink of glass from the bar as someone, likely Raoul, poured a drink. I left my listening post then and rang for a bellboy. When the youth arrived, I handed him a note I had hastily scribbled and instructed him to deliver it to the next room in about 15 minutes. I hopped over the balcony and peered in through the window, making sure to keep myself well out of sight. The scene that met my eyes was fraught with tension. Christine stood by the piano with her arms wrapped around herself, in that way that I suddenly remembered indicated she was feeling defensive and unsure. Raoul roved about the room, waving a glass that he held in his hand with expansive motions as he ranted about how he had been treated. The child sat on the floor in a corner, looking at the music box with fascination. He had the cover off of it, and parts scattered all across the floor. I scowled in irritation. The music box could not deliver my musical message for me if the little Dickens had it torn apart. I shifted my attention back to Christine and Raoul, watching them bicker as I tried to quickly figure out what alternate method I could use to reintroduce my music. I learned much about the current state of their relationship. Disastrous was the adjective that sprang to my mind, but couldn't figure out how to solve my own immediate problem. Suddenly, I heard the music box give out its melody once more. I snapped my gaze back to the corner to see that the boy had accurately reassembled the works and wound it up. I raised an eyebrow, impressed by the child's technical skills. He held it out to call his father's attention to it. Raoul wandered over, drink in hand. He stood over the child and the music box, then reached out with his toe and gave the box a little kick, sending it flying out of the boy's grasp. I could see his little face as this happened, and the resigned expression on it told me that this was not a new occurrence. I felt no attachment to the little de Chagny progeny, but pity stabbed through my heart as I watched this. No child deserved that kind of treatment. I looked next at Christine. She had whirled upon hearing the music box and was staring at it as if she'd seen a ghost. The pale tinge of pink that normally adorned her cheeks drained from her face as she turned white. My ploy had worked. She was quite clearly remembering me. She wrapped her arms around herself more tightly and looked around the room, paying attention to the darkest corners. I backed quickly away from the glass, but she did not think to check the balcony. The falling dusk would have concealed my black-clad form in any case. A knock came at the door of the suite. It was the bellboy with my message. Raoul accepted the note and opened it. The patron who sponsored Madame de Chagny's performance wishes to treat the Vicomte de Chagny to a drink in the gentlemen's salon in celebration of your safe arrival, as soon as may be convenient. Raoul departed, whistling. I presumed it was the prospect of a free drink that had pulled him out of his black mood. I snickered a little bit to think that he'd walk into the salon and find no one there. Christine's maid entered the room to retrieve the boy. I presumed it was his bedtime. My heart surged and electricity coursed through my veins. This was my opportunity. I made sure my mask was in place, then unlatched the balcony door and stepped through it. Christine whirled back to the balcony door on hearing the hinges creak. I locked eyes with her and took one more step toward her. Her eyes rolled up in her head, and she fainted to the floor.